I'm Anna Culler from Surrey-Atkin Electric Membership Corporation in Dobson, North Carolina. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
Support for this podcast comes from Meridian Cooperative. Recognizing that we are all stronger together, Meridian is firmly committed to strengthening the cyber resilience of their industry by providing the best cybersecurity technology for co-ops to fortify their defenses.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. The penetration of electric vehicles into the U.S. market is increasing at a rapid pace and is expected to accelerate in the coming decade as more and more car manufacturers expand their fleets into the EV space. But as utilities, including electric cooperatives and other interests, work to build EV infrastructure that can keep pace with the expected demand, a growing web of connected charging stations will create a host of new cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Here to discuss what those vulnerabilities are and how to mitigate them are Shannon Murry with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cyber Division and Brian Sloboda, NRECA's Consumer Solutions Director and the association's point person on electric vehicles. Shannon, Brian, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Shannon, we know that computer networks in offices are a point of vulnerability for hackers. Give us a sense of what kinds of attacks we might expect on those platforms, and then later I want to kind of compare and contrast that to what we're talking about today.
So there are a number of vulnerabilities associated with information technology networks, which I'll contrast in a little bit with operational technology networks, which operate, in this case, electric cooperatives. Well-known attacks such as phishing attacks, denial of service, as well as business email compromise attacks impact information technology networks of companies daily. But it's important to look into those and to actively work to prevent those types of attacks because a compromise of an IT system could serve as a pivot point into the OT system or operational technology system of a company. And a really good example of that is the Colonial Pipeline case, in which the pipeline itself, the operational technology, the computers and devices that make the pipeline operate, those were not impacted by malware. It was, in fact, the IT side of things that was impacted. But out of an abundance of caution, the operators of Colonial Pipeline shut down the OT side of things as well in order to prevent the spread of that malware. So it's really important to protect that more vulnerable IT side of things so as not to impact the more critical OT side of things.
Thank you, Shannon. And so, Brian, Distributed Energy Resources, or DER, which is what we're talking about today, they have introduced sort of this new layer of cybersecurity vulnerability for utilities. Can you sort of give us a baseline? What do we mean when we say DER, and what kinds of devices are we talking about?
Yeah, sure thing, Scott. So when we talk about DER or distributed energy resources, what we're talking about are smaller generation units installed throughout a service territory. This is not a centralized power plant. These are often owned by consumers, and those can be consumers that are companies with sophisticated IT systems, or they can be individual homeowners such as yourself and me. And it includes technologies such as rooftop solar, small wind, behind-the-meter energy storage, but it also includes devices like smart thermostats and electric vehicles. And where the increase in vulnerability comes from is the fact that there are a lot more of these out there, and you have a lot of them being owned by homeowners that lack the sophisticated IT departments, because you don't have that in your house, and they don't necessarily do things like change the default passwords. So some simple cybersecurity best practices can go a long way in making things better.
And Shannon, can you sort of give us an idea of what an attack on one of these DER systems might look like? You mentioned earlier the ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline. Is it different from ransomware? Is it different from the other viruses we think about when we think of computer vulnerabilities?
So there's two main vectors by which you could look at a cyber attack on a DER system. So you sort of categorize them into two buckets. First is physical access. So think about how, in particular, an electric vehicle charging station, for example, the electric vehicle charging software on the vendor, for example, might have root user access. So anyone who gets access to that physical device, that electric vehicle charging station, and gets access to the root user, that can provide complete and total access to the operating components of that system. Another really important thing to look at is ports that are on these electric vehicle charging stations, Ethernet ports, USB ports. It is possible for attackers to, walk up to an electric vehicle charging station, and if they know where to look and if it's configured in a certain way, they can plug in their own malicious device and install malware that way. On the other side of things is remote access vulnerabilities. Remote access is used on these electric vehicle charging stations in order to easily push firmware updates and otherwise service these devices from afar. These virtual remote access capabilities can be intercepted by bad actors. And you mentioned earlier, what is the difference between a DER attack and ransomware or other virus attack? A ransomware attack is mostly looked at by the attackers for economic gain. They want to get money out of it, or in most cases, Bitcoin, which that they convert to, dollars or whatever. A DER attack would be more of a disruptive or destructive attack, where an attacker wants to cease charging to an electric vehicle charging station or configure the electric vehicle charging station in a way that it's no longer functional anymore, or steal customer data. Any number of ways that would disrupt or prove to be destructive to those systems.
Yeah, I do want to get into the whole idea of this charging network. Right now, we're seeing a huge upswing in this trend toward EVs, and I think we can expect that to continue. As this network of charging stations proliferates, what are the particular vulnerabilities that you can see developing as this network grows?
In terms of attack vectors or similarities, a good example might be to compare and contrast with is solar arrays, so solar panels. Attacks on like an electric vehicle charging station might be similar to that in that they're both considered to be distributed energy resources, but electric vehicle charging stations have this unique added element of anyone can access it. If you think about it, solar farms and wind farms, aside from the people that are operating it and maybe those who are there to service them, the general public doesn't have access to them. But as I mentioned earlier, these electric vehicle charging stations, they might have ports on them that, you could plug stuff into. And if someone, anyone can access and charge their vehicle at an electric vehicle charging station. So that adds in a whole other element of vulnerability.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Scott, you're really looking at something that's a team effort here. We've worked with a couple of co-ops on developing RFPs for public charging networks. And one of the absolutely critical elements is cybersecurity. And I would say one of the advantages that an electric vehicle charger has over, say, a gas pump is the fact that the charger is doing diagnostics all the time and can theoretically determine when it's been tampered with. Whereas a gas pump can have a credit card skimmer placed into it, and it can sit there for quite a while, stealing people's credit cards. With the EV charger, if everything works the way it's designed, you should be able to see that the device has been tampered with. Now, of course, that's not going to be foolproof. The bad guys are always going to do bad guy stuff, which means that the good guys have to do the good guy stuff.
That's great. Let's pause there for a minute for a word from our sponsor. And when we come back, I want to ask Brian how electric co-ops are responding to this new threat.
Support for Along Those Lines comes from Meridian Cooperative, your technology partner for the trusted solutions you need to secure your IT and OT against cyber attack. From 24/7, 365 managed security services to next-gen firewalls and employee education, Meridian leverages cutting-edge technologies and partners with industry leaders to ensure that you have access to the best cyber protection and prevention tools available. Find them online at meridian.coop.
I'm Adam Starr from Grady EMC in Cairo, Georgia. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. Brian, I know you talk to a lot of co-ops about EVs. Are you hearing more from within the program of people concerned about the vulnerabilities that these devices are creating beyond what they're sort of used to dealing with?
Yeah, absolutely. Co-op staff are concerned about it. They want to make sure that they understand the industry recommended practices that they should be doing at their co-ops. They want to understand what they need to advise their consumer members to do to make sure that the vehicles that the co-op is promoting are, safer than if you just did nothing. But at the end of the day, this is such a big leap in technology, and it has so many upsides that we really don't want to scare people away from the technology. If you look at the history of cars get stolen, cars get vandalized. And sadly, this is the evolution of the threats that we're facing. So as a car owner, just as you have to lock your doors, you better make sure you're taking cybersecurity seriously.
And Shannon, you mentioned earlier how these charging stations are vulnerable in the sense that people can walk up to them in a way that they can't walk up to other utility infrastructure. What are you telling people on how the owner of a charging network can secure their system better? And then after that, I want to sort of get a sense of what you tell people. If the system does get attacked, what do you want them to do in terms of interacting with the FBI?
So to the first part of your question, there's certainly concern surrounding the physical access that is a unique attack vector for electric vehicle charging stations. But I think it's also important to emphasize the capabilities that are afforded by remote access to these systems. And I think, sort of a worst case scenario would be a large scale infection of many electric vehicle charging stations. An attack such as that would constitute what is called a demand side attack, where a number of individual devices connected to the grid are infected with some type of malware. And the bad guy can drive up electricity production or consumption to such a degree that would cause disruptions in the electric grid as a whole. And the sort of analogy I like to draw is the electric vehicle charging stations are almost operating similar to a botnet, which is a whole network of hijacked devices that are infected by a malware and controlled by a hacker. So we really want to avoid that. And to your point of how can electric vehicle charging station owners protect their systems, a couple of things that we like to tell folks is, first off, to limit what the attacker can find on open source. There's a lot of information that is publicly available as to unique configurations of systems and technical specifications of these electric vehicle charging stations and the components within them. And so it's important for companies to limit how much of that information is available online for the attacker to look at, study, and plan their attack vector. Another really important suggestion is for owners of these electric vehicle charging stations to baseline their network. And what we mean by that is to monitor their network for a period of time so as to know what is normal on their network and what is not normal on their network. So then, when something comes across your intrusion detection system that some guy in Romania using a VPN at 3 a.m. logged into your corporate network, they know that that's bad and they can deal with that in a timely fashion. Another really important prevention tip is two-factor authentication. It seems simple, but that extra layer of protection is useful and sometimes makes the difference. And lastly, it's really important to fully patch external-facing devices. So anything that connects to the internet, and especially with the case of these electric vehicle charging stations, that might include interface with some type of application. Anything that connects to the internet, it's always really important to be up to date on all your patches and things like that. And in terms of working with the FBI, we're here to provide guidance so that you can properly protect your systems. When we produce these documents such as PINs, which are private industry notifications, as well as flashes, which are FBI liaison system alerts. And those are sort of the latest and greatest that we've seen in terms of attack vectors, what we've been seeing in various industries, and we share that with the public so that you protect your systems.
You know what, Scott? What I'd like to add is everything that Shannon described is proven methods to stop the bad guys. And what it ultimately comes down to is training. Every company, whether it's the co-op, the charging network vendor, or sadly us as individuals, we need to make sure that we're trained on how to do these things. It only takes a moment of inattentiveness. Click on the wrong link, skip the patch update because you got to run off to the football game to see your child, and the bad guys are there to pounce on that. So I think folks need to listen to Shannon and her colleagues and the great work that they're doing and make sure that they're doing this basic blocking and tackling and try to reduce the inattentiveness at times.
Great. And as far as what the future holds, I think we can all safely assume that EVs are going to continue to proliferate. I wonder if you would both sort of talk about what this means. And Brian, you alluded to it before. It's just a vulnerability that you're going to have to deal with. But do you see the industry having to change in any way to accept and to react to this particular new vulnerability?
Yeah, sure thing. Change is inevitable. I mean, you have to have a great defense in order to win this. When we look at electric vehicles, whether it's light duty, medium duty, heavy duty, mass transit, you're looking at substantial benefits to the environment, substantial benefits to your financial bottom line. And any time that you have something out there that can be attacked, it will be attacked. So it means that Shannon and the folks at the FBI, the folks within industry are going to have to continue to evolve, come up with better defenses, and continue to thwart the bad guys at every step of the way.
Yeah, I mean, like Brian was saying, it's a number of things. A lot of it is prevention. It's a lot easier to, harden your systems before an attack than try and clean up the mess after the fact. Just sort of at a broad level, it's important to look at devices such as electric vehicle charging stations from both the device level, like how do you harden that individual electric vehicle charging station, as well as the network that it's connected to. And if you're able to look at it and combat cyber threats from both of those angles, you should be pretty set.
That's great. Brian, Shannon, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Really good information and a lot of stuff to think about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and to our sponsor, Meridian Cooperative. For more on this and other podcasts, visit electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Courtney Branham from Central Rural Electric Cooperative in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.